If you just joined us, you're welcome. You're watching Arise Prime Time. Now, at this point on the program, I introduce our guest analysts who will give their perspectives and stretch it so far. I'm now joined in the studio by Arise News analyst Mahmoud Jega and Dr. Constance Ikokwu. Good to see you both, and thanks for your time. Let's start quickly by talking about the National Assembly, and there's one sore point I want to raise. Let's start with you, Dr. Constance Ikokwu, and it has to do with the 10th Assembly. For Mao Ohoabunwa, he says this is not a rubber stamp National Assembly, and he thinks that it's also too early in the day for anyone to think so. So what do you say in the, for especially those who argue that some of these principal officers are actually a very close ally of the presidency?
Yeah, so Senator Mao Ohoabunwa did admit that there was grumbling after the names of the principal officers were announced. And it was so because while the Senate President, Godswill Akpabio, said that he widely consulted with members before there was an announcement, some party members or some colleagues countered and said that was not the case. And from what I'd gathered, indications are that there was a list. Godswill Akpabio said that the list was from the Senate caucus. It means it came from the members themselves. But indications were also that that list was a list approved by the presidency. That essentially means that the presidency got its candidates. I mean, it's not a bad thing. They got the candidates they wanted. The question then will be, if that is the case, are we going to have a Senate that is independent, that will work more in the interest of the people, or that will be one that just does whatever the presidency wants? That is there for us to see. From the 9th Assembly, as he also pointed out, a lot of people felt that it was a rubber stamp. There are more expectations this time around because we really face a serious crisis in the economy. So we're hoping that it will be a different situation. But the other thing to also say is that the seats were shared equitably. So there are 8 offices. The APC got 4, and then there was a PDP, I think PDP, NNPP, and Labour Party shared the remaining. So you would say that at least everybody was given a position, and they would probably work together, in this assembly.
Let me bring you Mahmoud Jega. Listening to Constance, one key thing that was played out has to do with the scenario of every 12 there is a dissenting voice. So is that okay for us to discard what the Senate President has said in terms of saying that this is a consensus, so with some few who were aggrieved or grumbling?
Well, a consensus usually, I mean, in a large body like, let's say, the House that has 360 members, or even the Senate that has 109, consensus means most members agree. You can't probably have every single member agreeing, to the consensus. But the most important thing now, going forward, really is the effectiveness with which the new National Assembly discharges its duties, this independence that we are talking about. There is nothing wrong with the Assembly members. I mean, Mazi Ohoabunwa said so. There has to be cooperation between the legislature. The Constitution is not expecting a war permanently between executive and legislature. They have to cooperate in the most important areas. However, where there is evidence of excess or laxity on the part of the executive, that's where we expect them to stamp their feet and exercise proper oversight and check excesses and waste and other things. That's the issue. But of course, maybe people are right when they say that the former National Assembly, the 9th one, cooperated too much with the executive. so that many perceived lapses were not openly challenged. That's the situation you don't want. But of course, this present leadership was essentially chosen by the presidency and the party, because many weeks before the inauguration, the APC in particular announced with the concurrence of the presidency that this is the person we want for Senate President and Deputy, and this is the person we want for Speaker. Although there was a contest and election and everything, but essentially those ones got through. Now that does not mean, because they had the backing of the presidency and the party, that they should not be alive to their responsibilities of being vigilant and checking where there is excess and abuse.
Well, Dr. Ikokwu, you know, listening to Jega here, one key thing has to do with going back again, looking at the last assembly, the 9th assembly, and for many, they now think that perhaps this present assembly must not kowtow with the executive arm. This is about independence of the judiciary. Should the policies and programs of the executive tallies with the good of the overall people of Nigeria, should there be bickering?
Well, normally in the National Assembly, the National Assembly's job is most times approving what the president gives to them, seeks for approval for, and then I've got the budget of the country, a lot of money that goes through the country that has to be spent, they have to approve it. So this is where the party comes in, this is where the presidency comes in. If the president wants to borrow 3 trillions of naira, and the National Assembly feels that this is not good for the country, then this is where they have to stamp their feet as an independent institution serving the Nigerian people and say, hey, President, we are from the same party, but we believe that this will not augur well for the country, so we're not going to approve this. You want to see that. Yes, there is need for collaboration. There is need to work together for the country to make progress, for the country to improve. At the same time, like he mentioned, excesses should definitely be stopped at the door once that happens. So this is what people will be looking forward to see from this assembly.
Independence, collaboration isn't same as bickering, Mahmoud, is that?
Well, there must be some bickering. This is politics, and if nothing else, there is a contest between individual parliamentarians to get what is good for their constituents, because the needs of various parts of the country are sometimes competing. There are things that, of course, many things that we all share together. I mean, everybody wants to see economic progress, we want to see improved power supply, we want to see improved security. But this part of the country may want one thing and another part of the country may want another, and possibly we can't have both at the same time, so there has to be some prioritizing. So there is bound to be some bickering, apart from individual differences too. But let's not forget that all the members of the National Assembly also belong to political parties. So if you belong to a political party, especially if you belong to the same political party as the president, then the assumption is that the party has a program. And if the president is implementing the program of his party, as a member of that party, you are also expected to be part of the support for that program. But of course, there will still be differences about approach and effectiveness of implementation, and some lapses here and there, which as a member of the parliament you should stand up and point out. But there is nothing wrong if you share with the president the same party platform and program and are pursuing its implementation together. Because at the next election, all of you could swim or sink together based on whether you delivered on your party programs.
Swim or sink, it comes to INEC, which we just saw Professor Mahmoud speaking, Yakubu speaking of what INEC is doing at the moment. Ezewan Wagu, Chairman Partners for Electoral Reform, spoke to us earlier, and he said the 6 specifics listed by the EU, only 2 fell, within the purview of INEC. Speak to us, Ikokwu, here on why you think that the EU's report on the last election isn't properly fit to be a report for INEC alone.
No, so they are doing a report for the entire country. So the responsibilities do not fall on INEC alone. There are areas where the legislature has to come in. But before I even expatiate on that, 3 points quickly. Okay. Number one, it is the prerogative of a country to invite or not invite election observers. In this case, INEC invited the EU election observer team. In addition to other African countries, there are so many others within the country, within the continent and within the country that were invited to witness the election. So with the EU, they had over 100 observers on ground. That's number one. So whatever report they give to you, you have to deal with it. Number two, Nigeria receives a lot of money from the EU for election and for other purposes. So if you receive money from those people, you will be liable. They would want to see you account for it. You know, that's number two. Then number three, we are not conducting elections for the EU. We are conducting elections for our country. So we should be a country capable of reflecting on shortcomings, on failures. If there are any of those things that happen, weaknesses, we should be able to work on them. Then coming to the report, it talks about ambiguities in the law. Yes, this has to do with the legislature, not INEC, but it's important because, so for instance, there are some senators that became senator without running for primary and they ended up in the Senate or in the National Assembly. That is something to be sorted out because then you have someone as a senator through Supreme Court judgment. And then secondly, quickly, Sierra Leone had just ended an election recently. And in their law, you should if you're going to be a president, you should have at least 55% of the votes cast. In Nigeria, we don't have that. We have high candidate with the highest number of votes. In this case, Bola Tinubu scored 37% of the vote, which is not a true reflection of the majority of the country. So in terms of law, is this something that we should be looking at? If the first and second, if there's no clear candidate with 50 or 55% of the votes, should there be a runoff between the two leading candidates? I think to give a real reflection of the country.
So you're setting an agenda for the National Assembly. So in this case, it's the law presently that has given us a president. So you're saying the National Assembly should look into that. Quickly, let's close on this. Looking at the report, INEC shouldn't be the only one speaking now. There's also an issue on security. There's also an issue on women that are being disenfranchised that is also within the purview of political parties. What should we be doing as a people with such recommendations?
Okay, you see, honestly, when I read the report, especially its executive summary, what Dr. Ikokwu said is very true. You collected money from people and you invited them to come and witness the election, so they are about to say something. However, the executive summary gave me the impression that they merely listed all the shortcomings of Nigerian society as a developing country, because they mentioned everything from economic crisis. They said there was fuel scarcity, there was no naira cash available, there was violence in many parts of the country, there was thuggery in some areas, there were fake news, there was cash, there was vote buying. You see, most of these things are beyond. But of course, some are specific to INEC, like they said, the failure to post the results real time. But that also has to do with the infrastructural incapacities that we have in many cases. So they listed virtually all the shortcomings of a developing country. Okay, quite all right. Some of the other specific things they demanded, like changing the process of appointing INEC officials so that it is seen to be, they are seen to be independent and non-partisan. You see, this is not a new recommendation. The Justice Ways Panel on Electoral Reforms in 2010, 2007 and 8 actually said so, that why don't we appoint the INEC chairman more or less like we appoint Supreme Court justices, that let the National Judicial Council advertise, interview, this and that. So it's an old recommendation. Right now, the problem we have is that the Constitution vests the power for all executive appointments in the president. But you can modify that by law or by changing the Constitution. So certainly there are some of the recommendations that we ought to look at. The problem, as the last speaker said, was that the report opened on a negative note, because the opening sentence said, like, the election didn't meet the expectations maybe of the international community, and then they listed all these things, like even fuel scarcity and the lack of the cashless policy. All those ones are shortcomings of us as a third world society.
Well, and we'd like to thank you for your time, both Constance Ikokwu and Mahmoud Jega. Many thanks. Well, that's it for the program on Arise Prime Time. Do join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, it's many thanks for watching and goodbye.